It was a crisp autumn evening when Sarah and I decided to escape for a night, a much-needed break from the familiar routine. A month into our marriage, everything seemed perfect, or so I thought. We were heading to a nearby city, just an hour from our cozy home, for a simple getaway. It was a brief retreat, but it was symbolic, our first trip as a married couple. I remember the way Sarah smiled at me as she fastened her seatbelt, her soft curls framing her face, her eyes holding a sense of quiet contentment. If I had known what would unfold that night, I'd have clung to that moment a little longer. We checked into the hotel, the night still young and promising. Sarah took her time getting ready, slipping into a long dress that flowed elegantly to the floor, but with a daringly low-cut top. I'd never seen her look so radiant. I could tell she felt good too, confident, beautiful. She twirled in front of the mirror, flashing me a playful smile as if asking for approval. "You look stunning," I whispered, pulling her close. She smelled like vanilla and fresh rain. She always had that calming effect on me, grounding me in ways I didn't quite understand. We decided to head to a bar nearby. The dim lights, soft music, and chatter of strangers provided the perfect backdrop for our night. We found a cozy corner, ordered drinks, and settled in. I couldn't help but watch Sarah, the way her fingers traced the rim of her glass, how her laughter came easily, effortlessly. For a moment, it felt like nothing could ever taint this happiness. But then, a man approached our table, tall, confident, with an air of familiarity. He leaned down, wrapping Sarah in a hug that seemed far too comfortable for my liking. I could feel a knot forming in my stomach, the kind you can't quite explain, but you know something's off. "Hey, Sarah, how's married life treating you?" he said, his tone casual but laced with something else. His eyes never met mine. Instead, they stayed fixed on Sarah's cleavage, openly ogling as if I didn't exist. "Oh, hi, John," Sarah said, her voice uneasy. "This is my husband." She introduced me quickly, her body shifting ever so slightly, a subtle signal of discomfort that only I noticed. John, as she had called him, barely glanced at me before continuing his conversation with her. They worked in the same company, she explained, though John was based at the head office in this city. He seemed more interested in her neckline than in the words she was saying, and I could see Sarah growing more uncomfortable by the second. After a few awkward minutes, John finally left, but not before returning with another round of drinks. He lingered at our table, making small talk, and with every passing second, stealing glances down her dress. It was infuriating, but I held my tongue. I trusted Sarah, and she was clearly trying to wrap up the conversation. But what unnerved me most was the way John and his group of friends kept looking over, laughing. I could tell they were sharing some inside joke, and it didn't sit right with me. Sarah insisted we move to another bar, and though I was curious about her sudden urgency, I let it slide. We enjoyed the rest of our night, but that encounter with John lingered in the back of my mind. It gnawed at me like a faint, persistent itch. Still, as time passed, I chalked it up to nothing more than a strange coincidence, until that night, 4 years later, when everything shattered. We were sitting on the couch, a quiet evening at home, when Sarah turned to me, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. I'll never forget the look in her eyes, a mix of fear and guilt, like she was about to confess something that had been eating away at her soul for years. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart stopped. In that instant, I knew. Before she even spoke the words, I could feel the ground beneath me begin to crumble. "I slept with someone," she admitted, her eyes filling with tears, "before we got married." The room went silent, the weight of her confession hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I stared at her, my mind racing, trying to process what she had just said. I felt a strange detachment, like this wasn't really happening, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. "Who?" I managed to ask, though my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "When? How?" She swallowed hard, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. "It was John," she said, the name hitting me like a punch to the gut, the guy we ran into at the bar that night. I blinked, the memory of that night flooding back with a clarity that made my chest ache. The way John had looked at her, the way his friends had laughed, it all made sense now. They weren't laughing because they'd seen down her top. They were laughing because he'd already been with her months before our wedding at the company Christmas party. While I was planning our future together, she had slipped away to his hotel room, letting him have her in a moment of weakness. I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing down with the weight of betrayal. I asked her why she had chosen now to tell me, why she had let me sit there in that bar, completely oblivious to the truth. Her answer was simple and devastating. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the guilt. Maybe it was the way John had resurfaced in her thoughts recently. But she couldn't hold it in any longer. For days, I wrestled with the revelation. I loved Sarah. How could I not? She was my world, my partner, the woman I had vowed to spend my life with. But now, there was this fracture between us, a deep crack that threatened to break everything we had built. In the weeks that followed, I struggled with forgiveness. Every time I looked at her, I saw John. I saw their secret, something they shared that I had known about, something that felt like it could never be erased. Stara was remorseful, constantly apologizing, doing everything she could to make it right. And slowly I began to understand something that surprised even me. Love isn't perfect. It isn't some fairy tale where nothing ever goes wrong. People make mistakes, sometimes big ones. And while Sarah's betrayal cut deep, it didn't define her. It didn't erase the love we had shared, the memories we had made, or the life we were building. It was a part of our story, yes, but it wasn't the end. One evening, as we sat in silence, I turned to her. "I'm hurt," I admitted, "but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to forgive you if you're willing to rebuild this with me." She broke down then, sobbing into my chest, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were on the same page again. It wouldn't be easy, and the trust we had lost would take time to restore. But beneath the pain and the betrayal, there was still love, and that was worth fighting for. As I lay in bed that night, I realized that love isn't about perfection. It's about weathering the storms, even when they threaten to tear you apart. It's about choosing each other every day despite the flaws, the mistakes, and the imperfections. And in that choice, there's a kind of beauty that no betrayal could ever destroy.